Welcome everybody to the 5G3 California meeting. We're really delighted to have you here, and we hope you find this evening really informative, and it's so that you share the information you learned as well as information about what we're trying to do to help in terms of getting your friends and family involved. My name is Julie Levine. Tonight I will be co-facilitating with my dear friend Kathleen Gildred. Thank you so much, Kathleen. You gotta talk really loud. Okay, thank you. We're going to just be up here for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we're going to go sit down like you all, and we're going to listen to Mark. So we're really delighted to have Mark Graham with us tonight. So first I just want to say, I live in Old Topanga. I've noticed a very major increase in radiation, wireless radiation in my community. I just would like to put a call out. Kathleen did send a request on behalf of our group to city planning for updated information about wireless infrastructure rollouts, both pending and current, in Topanga generally. However, I would love to talk to anyone after the meeting who lives in Old Canyon who's experiencing similar issues. Marin Lutz, who's a board member and also my friend, is going to be taking some notes tonight. And we are being filmed, but as I mentioned earlier, we're just filming the speaker. We will not be filming the audience as we respect their confidentiality. So without further ado, we are going to start with good news. Okay? And I would like to begin by recognizing Sherry Spielman. She won in a fight against 2 cell phone towers in Woodland Hills, California. Sherry, will you come up and share with us about your success? Watch me just sit where I am and I'll take over. And speak very loud.
Okay. You're probably wondering what this is. This is what it takes. It takes 2 years, a hearing, an appeal hearing, two different zoning administrators to get rid of the towers that were going to go directly behind my home. I live at Canoga and Ventura Boulevard. And I'm the first set of houses right behind the commercial buildings. These were not the the antennas that you see. This was the 12, the big guys. And they were going to go on the building right behind my house. And the only thing that was between us was the parking lot. So basically we were going to be exposed to these 2 5G towers with only 70 feet in between where we sleep, where we live, and because of the pandemic now, where we work all the time. So I had to do some digging, and I only tell you what I do because it's what I do for a living that actually helped me fight this. And I work in real estate. I started digging through all the disclosures. I started digging wherever it's loud, project, maybe I can see. I had to dig through everything that I could, because if anybody has ever bought or sold a home, you know that those disclosures, what's on there, those aren't good things. They're on there for a reason. But the other thing that I was able to dig up was mistakes that were made on the application. And one of the things that Verizon missed was disclosing that the 500 foot radius of the projected site sat within a sensitive use area. This is what was, yeah, I have a whole file. This is what was initially sent to us. It's sent to us by Verizon. But right here, you can see, this is Costanzo Fire Station 84 Park. And on page 1 of that application, it says, does the proposed site sit within a sensitive use area? E.g., schools, parks. They left it blank. They basically busted themselves and said, here's our radius, but we're not going to disclose this information. The other thing that they were working toward was trying to get a CEQA exemption. That is the California Environmental Quality Act. And under this exemption, they would be allowed to place those cell towers. Well, Miss Real Estate decided to go do some digging around and some more research and pulled up at the CEQAportal.org the exact exemption that they were trying to get away. And it says, a store, hotel, office, restaurant, or similar commercial or institutional structure not involving the use of significant amounts of hazardous substances. And it goes on to talk about the size of the building and whatnot. But the last part of it says, and the surrounding area is not environmentally sensitive. So we go back to page 1 of that application. Is it within a sensitive use area? Example given, schools or parks. Nothing. That was one way we got them. We got the commissioners to see that this did not belong there. The other way was basically Verizon did not, when they went to the Woodland Hills Warner Center Neighborhood Council and they got all the approvals, they took all the pictures. What they neglected to do was they neglected to take pictures from the south side of the boulevard pointing toward that proposed site. And if they had done that, then everyone would have seen that the homes sat at eye level with the proposed site. The other thing that they did was they gave me all the plans, which after this meeting you're welcome to go through this file and I can show you where to look, where to dig for this information. But they were violating the code, the height limitation based on the code of the building behind us. So there were several areas where we were able to hit them and have these towers denied. It took a lot of hours, it took a lot of preparation. Bob Blumenfield, who typically does not take a position on cell towers in favor of the constituents, actually did this time. So regardless of what you think of me, he's got this one right. But they did get involved, and that did help at that hearing. So aside from the health risks, which we all know are real, that none of them would listen to, I had to remind them that regardless of whether or not you think they are real, they're believed to be real. And because they're believed to be real, the property values of those homes will in fact tank. And we stood to lose about $250,000 in equity in our home. So it was definitely worth fighting for 2 years. And I'm glad that we won. And if you have any more questions about what I'm saying here, I'm more than happy to talk to you after.
Let's give it up for There's somebody here I know is going to want to talk to you after the meeting, and I'm going to introduce her next. And I just want to a couple of points that she made that are super important. The reason they won't acknowledge help is not because it's helping, because as I shared last month, we won an FCC lawsuit that proved that there was irreparable harm, particularly to children, that was being ignored by the oversight body, which is a sellout organization that's in a revolving door with the telecom industry. we were able to prove the harm from the science in over 10,000 scientific studies. But the current law, the Telecom Act of 1996, precludes any challenges based on the environment, which the courts have taken to mean our health. Not to mention health of animals and plants and everything on the globe. So what Sherry did, which was brilliant, is she found the holes in their application, because they're just railroading these things through, and we often can find them. Problems with the CUP, maybe the conditional use permit is expired, maybe they haven't gotten the necessary permits, maybe they've lied about the proximity to sensitive use areas, and she obviously has taken this really the way it needs to go. And I think the most important thing that Sherry said was she showed you that document and that it took 2 years. And we cannot give up, because that's what it takes to go against that kind of money and that kind of influence. So next, I'd like to introduce, I'd like to ask Brenda Martinez, who many of you know from Boyle Heights, to step up and give us an update on the fight against the cell towers. Brenda, come on up, and why don't you just take my seat and talk loudly?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I know some of you already know me. I am really thankful for the invitation, and I just want to give you a really quick update. So, we've been fighting this cell tower. It's a 51 feet, 12 antennas with the possibility of adding even more, because now Verizon owns that antenna and they can rent it to whoever they want. So it's been almost 2 years, and we finally got some attorneys willing to take our case, because our case was basically a done deal. Had already been probably like 5 years that they had approved the CUP. I'm sorry, 3 years that they had approved the CUP and the land BLA, DBS, or Building and Safety. So we fought organizing. They told us that there was no way we were going to stop this. Unfortunately, fortunately, we were able to organize. We got the support of Julie, and we started seeing the same things that Shirley's talking about. There were a lot of discrepancies in the application. Some of the application was not even signed by who was the owner of this tower. There was issues with the insurance. There was issues with the CQA. There's so many issues. And finally, we were able to find an attorney who specialized in municipal law, and were able to tell us that the CUP, or the conditional use permit that was given to Verizon, because where our garden sits is an agricultural zoning, it was expired. So we moved forward with gathering community members who were willing to take this lawsuit, and we gathered a few people. We launched the lawsuit, and about a month ago, we did the attorney file for a restraining order and to stop the building, because Verizon did not stop building. The property owners did not stop, even though their contract was expired. So unfortunately, Verizon finally got involved, and they stopped the restraining order. They said that they were never notified about this hearing, and they wanted the attorney to file again the restraining order, and this time against them. We're a very small community. We don't have the means. We have an attorney who's working pro bono for us, and she can't afford spending too much time in our case. So she's really taking a very long time to refile this lawsuit, or the restraining order, per se, against Verizon. And so they moved forward really, really fast, and now we have a tower in our community. It's been very disappointing, extremely depressing, because I step out of my house and the first thing I see is this big clock tower. Most of the community members are constantly coming to me and saying, "Is this it? That's it? Is it over? Did they build this tower?" And literally is in the middle of our community garden. It was literally next to the playground. They moved the playground and hide it so that people won't see it. They put this big, massive boards so people were not allowed to see anything that they were building in there. They brought armed security guards so that we would not even get close to the construction place. They never put any kind of schedule of when they were supposed to construct or build. They started building at 6:30 in the morning, and they finished by 12 when people are supposed to be passing by. They being ruthless. They hit cars. They're constantly yelling at us because we were like there taking pictures of them. We fly a drone to take pictures because we're not allowed to even go near the area. And they called the police on us when we were asking for the permits. So it's been ridiculous. We asked for support from our officials, elected officials, and everybody has turned. They turn away. They don't want to deal with that. We have Kevin De Leon as our council member. We have Miguel Santiago as our assembly member. And they all are aware of this. Durazo is our senator. Jimmy Gomez is our congressman. And no one wants to deal with this. We brought to their attention all of the discrepancies in the application. We brought to their attention the expired permits. We brought to the attention of the planning and land use about the expired permits, and they just said, "Oh well, that's not our issue. We don't know how to deal with this. It's the telecommunications. I have to call so and so. I really don't know how to do this," and they just ignored us. We reach out to Kevin De Leon constantly, and all he says is like, yeah, we'll meet with you guys. Yeah, we'll meet with you guys, and that's it. We get nothing beyond that. We're still hopeful, that we could stop this. We started a GoFundMe so that we can afford paying the attorney, and hopefully she can spend a little more time in our case. But in the meantime, because this was a community center where we provided services for families, we still do our classes for children, arts and music in the sidewalk, and we're not giving up. So.
Yes, I was gonna say, let's get your GoFundMe campaign, we'll send it out with our next email, and we can also put it on our Facebook group and page. Also, I did confront Kevin De Leon on a progressive Democrat candidate, because he's running for mayor of LA, on a call the night before last, and I specifically for Brenda and Loyal Heights, and he said, "Oh yeah, well, I did everything I could." I said, "Well, you did nothing actually. You take money from telecom." I said, "I'm all for progressive Democrats, but I'm not for people who are taking money from corporations, because it's the same as the other corporations that you're fighting. So I want to know who in this group that's looking for money is not taking money from telecom. I'll support you, and I'll give you more if you're willing to do something about it." And I did get a couple of really good calls from Congress and stuff. But meanwhile, Kevin said, "Oh yeah, I do want to meet with you guys. I want to do what I can." So we're now trying to schedule another meeting.
Good. And I just want to say, in fact, he actually, because at one point Verizon wanted to sit down with the community and offer us money or something so that we could stay quiet. But Kevin De Leon's office actually said, "Yes, let's sit down and ask him for money for the city." And then Kevin said, "Well, you should have made that deal with them, instead of now you're your tower."
Yeah, well, yes.
Yeah,
Well,
so-
wormy squirmy.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Everybody else has good news they want to share, come on up. If not, I just want to say, Heather's not feeling well tonight, but she asked that there be a treasury report, and then we're gonna turn it over to Mark. However, he is gonna speak about other good news, which is for those of you who are on our email list, you know we've been sending you a lot of emails about these bad telecom bills. Well, we did win one of them, the biggest one, which was $556. And we talked about that last month, but Mark will talk about it a little bit as well tonight. That was a big win, and actually the legislators voted for it. We did not get their votes, even though we met with all of them. Okay, except Henry Stern, I want to really give him a cry out of support. He did either abstain or vote no on the words of the bills. So Henry Stern did come through for us. Assemblymember Bloom, on the other hand, quite the opposite. Horrific response, wouldn't even meet, and absolutely voted everything up. So just sharing that information with you. Mark will talk more about 556, and I'm turning it over to Kathleen for a quick treasurer's report, and then I'll introduce Mark.
I just want to say, Julie, do you think our recent win against the FCC?
Talk, we probably really
Yeah.
loud.
Do you think our recent win against the FCC can in any way weigh in on what Brenda's working on?
The problem with the FCC win is all it is at this point is a requirement that the FCC re-review the scientific evidence and show it reflected in their exposure limits and standards for cell phone use and everything else. Okay, that's where they are right now. If they fail to do it, then there has to be a counter, suit. So, unfortunately, other than it being influential, for instance, on the call with Kevin De Leon and the other people running for office, I did speak about that win, and I said, look, in light of this, if you care about the children in your community, you must take action and not allow this to move forward. So, in terms of persuasive argument, yes. But of course, we have the real problem with money in politics. So, I want to move forward because I know that Mark has so much to say to us tonight, but that is an excellent question.
Hi, everybody. First of all, Lucy, are you here?
Yeah,
Over here.
Hi, Lucy. First of all, I want to thank you on behalf of 5G. Also, Julie has asked me to read the treasurer's report, so I will read it from her.
Can you hear her?
Can't hear you.
I'm gonna, I think I might have to read it. Your voice is not projecting tonight.
Kathleen, put your big voice on.
I'm so sorry. Okay. So as of today, we have $6,694, of which $5,400 is in a checking account, and the rest is in business savings. And we've grown a lot, but we're keeping our money small because we want to use it to help and support efforts. So we try not to keep money too long. So all of our monetary donations go to support lawsuits, advocacy, education, outreach, and operation costs to stop the 5G rollout. We paid early attorney fees with Brenda, but very little, to get some initial consults and stuff. I'd like to see us supporting her more. So this year we received 32 donations so far, ranging from $10 to $400. We did make a one-time donation to the organization American for Responsible Technology because they led a lobbying effort for California, which I was part of, which was meeting with the legislators and then ultimately resulted in Governor Newsome vetoing the bill, which we convinced him to do, but Jerry Brown had vetoed basically the same bill, 649, as his last act in office. So that money, I think, was well spent. We're also, have to pay office supplies, print jobs, banners, signs, etc., our information handouts. And we just recently had to give over $100 to the Department of City Planning to receive information about rollout in our area. What's that?
Hopefully we'll be able to report on next time.
Which we sure hope we can report on next time. And it says, this is written by Heather, toward the future, our Executive Director, Julie Levine, foresees any future monetary investments going toward legal education and policy initiatives to telecom's control over our community infrastructure and legislative action. We are a nonprofit, tax-deductible 501c3. We're always grateful for any support. We've also been taking earmarked funds to support Daphne Tackover's work, who's an attorney who's very much of a lead around a number of lawsuits that are winning, including the recent one against the FCC. If you'd like to donate, you can go to our website, 5g3california.org. There's a donate button on the home screen, and you can also earmark that donation by sending us an email at 5g3california@gmail.com, letting us know what you'd like to see it earmarked for general needs, for lawsuits, or for education, outreach, and advocacy. And you can also break that down on our website. We have a way that you can designate that there. If you do use Amazon, which personally, they're bad, not a great organization, but if you do use them, Amazon Smile does list us as a charity, 5g3california.org. So please do designate us as your charity of choice, because eventually we get a little bit of money from that. And all of your contributions are tax deductible. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Without further ado, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce our guest this evening, Mark Graham, who flew down from Sacramento today. I have worked with Mark. I think we never actually met live. We've only met on Zoom, right?
Right.
But we've been working together for years now on calls, on legislative things, really in an effort to fight this. Mark has a really good track record in this, which he's going to share with us and teach us some of what it takes to do that fight. Yeah, he's done that in Elk Grove, a suburb of Sacramento, where he lives. And I just want to say another thing about Mark. He's a really good egg. In addition to being really helpful, he supports other groups. Like if people are having trouble and they need help, they can't afford an attorney. He's been super helpful, and he's walked people through this process in communities up and down the state of California. So thank you, Mark, for coming. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Julie. Hey, make sure this thing's still doing its thing. Well, apparently. All right. Anyway, my name is Mark Graham. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and for everybody that spoke before. I'm looking at two bright lights, and I'm not used to that, but I can handle it.
Well, while he's doing it, we're going to pass
Yes.
the hat.
Thank you. It's
Because
still
we
rolling.
wanna
Cool.
support
Thank you very much.
filmmaker, the person that's going to help us produce the film, and Lionel will provide the lights and help him. So if you can put something in the hat, that's great. I'll just have it passing while Mark talks. Even better.
All right. I got involved in.
You got to talk really loud.
Okay. And if it's not loud enough, let me know and I'll crank up the volume again. But my intention is to tell you about the grassroots campaign that we had in my city, Elk Grove, to keep cell antennas away from our homes, and a bunch of things that I learned along the way that I think are tools that people could use generally in wherever you are, in your city or county. And then along the way, I'm also going to tell you a bunch of things that are not directly related to Elk Grove, but they're about the battle that's playing out in cities and counties all across the United States over cell tower and cell antenna permitting. So it's intended to be informative, entertaining, but a practical, useful sort of presentation where you will learn some things that maybe you didn't know, and that you could apply and maybe become inspired. I'm already inspired by hearing the work that Sherry did and the success with that big old cell tower, and also Brenda, yes. And Brenda, I do want to talk to you more about that. And I hear you. That it is frustrating, and it's such an uphill battle. And I hear you when you say that you reached out to your representatives at the city or the county and Congress and got basically not a lot of cooperation. That's believe me, that's what happens. We're making a video. My intention is to put it up on YouTube. When that's done, I will. Julie will have the hyperlink to where you can find it, so you'll be able to watch that or share it. And another thing is, I also have a newsletter that I send out usually 1 or 2 times a month, and it's always about cell tower, cell antenna battles. It's often primarily about what's happening in Elk Grove, but what I find is that what we're doing and what we're learning in Elk Grove is generally applicable to other cities. So if you want to be on my mailing list for my newsletter, mark@keepcellantennasaway.org. You can write to me there. Mark, M-A-R-K, at keepcellantennasaway.org. All right, just for a curiosity, how many people in the audience, well, that's a much better view. How many people in the audience can feel the radiation that comes off of either a cell tower, a cell phone, a cell antenna? Okay, about half roughly. I sure can, and that I can tell you when and where. To me, it's an injury. It's an injury from overexposure, and I can tell you when and where that happened. In the fall of 2011, I moved into an apartment in West Sacramento for a short-term lease. I knew I didn't want to live there for a long time, but I sort of had to find a place. And my intention was to look for a place to sign a longer lease, while I was living there. And what I liked about that apartment was hardwood floors, because I also have chemical sensitivity, and carpeting. It's usually the carpet cleaners that have been used on carpeting has been a problem for me. Anyway, after a couple months living in this place in West Sacramento, I noticed that I had a low-intensity headache the whole time I was there that I did not have when I was gone. And then I came down with a cold, and it just seemed to linger. I've always had a strong immune system and been able to get rid of things like colds or whatever quickly, but it just stuck around. And there was an enormous cell tower. I drove past it every time on the way to the apartment complex, from the exit off of I-80. You couldn't miss it. And I had kind of told myself when I moved in, I'm only going to be here a short amount of time, and it's a few blocks away. It's not that close, so it won't even matter. That was a mistake. And I concluded, so I moved out of there because I put two and two together, and I associated that big cell tower and all of its radiation with those symptoms that I was experiencing. And since then, I've had other exposures to too much electromagnetic radiation, and it's something that I live with. And those of you that experience it as pain, you know what I'm talking about, because I'll speak for myself. I just deal with it every day. I have a cell phone. It's usually on airplane mode. I never have long conversations on the cell phone, and when I do talk on it, I never hold it right up to my head. I do it on speakerphone. I basically use it for text. All my long phone calls are on my landline at home. I got rid of my smart electric meter and my smart gas meter in October 2013, and that's because I met. Listen, I planted this here. This is not something I'm just digging out of the weeds. A friend of mine, Eric, in Sacramento, is a certified building biologist. And I helped him with his website, and in exchange, he came over to my house one day in October 2013, and he brought meters to measure magnetic fields, electric fields, dirty electricity, and he brought his computer and a nice little monitor so he could display it for me. And what we found was high amounts of dirty electricity in my house. But And dirty electricity, it just consists of spikes in the voltage, and you could see it I could see it on the graph that he was displaying. And we had a special meter that's called a Gram-Stetzer meter that was measuring, and I couldn't tell exactly what the Gram-Stetzer units are, but we'd like to have them lower than 50, and so we took this around to every outlet in every room in the house and plugged it in and took the measurements, and in some rooms it was over 2,000. Anyway, so that same day, This is part of my education into the whole world of EMF and health. And that wasn't electromagnetic fields, but it was electrical pollution. So that same day I bought from Eric 10 of these little Gram-Stetzer filters, and it's really a capacitor. It's a little thing that, 2 inches by 3 inches, plugs into the wall outlet, and for each room, we chose what was the ideal outlet in that room to plug the Gram-Stetzer filter into, so that it would have the greatest effect on lessening the dirty electricity. And anyway, 8 different rooms. I put the other 2 in my suitcase for when I travel, and I noticed before I went to sleep that night that it just felt quieter in my house. Not that it sounded quieter, but it felt quieter. And I told Eric that, and then I got up the next day and I said, it feels to me like a storm has ended. But if you had asked me beforehand, does it feel like there's a storm going on, some electrical storm or any kind of electrical pollution in your house, I would have said no. It actually felt better than the apartment where I had been living in Sacramento just before that. And I think it's because in the apartment I was exposed to everybody's Wi-Fi. So I go from that to, anyway. And that led to me, the next day I called our electric utility district. We have Sacramento Municipal Utility District. It's called SMUD. Yeah, they're my buddies. I've sued SMUD. I've sued them twice, actually. The first one I lost. That one lasted almost 3 years. And the second lawsuit is still alive, and it has to do with the fact that their electrical rates are too high, and they actually violate the California Constitution, Article 13C, which was put in place by Proposition 26. This is a diversion, but it's part of my story. Proposition 26 was attempting to rein in taxes by local government agencies, such as the city or the county or the electric district. And it says that they have to get voter approval for a tax anytime they impose, extend, or increase a tax. Well, what is a tax? They defined it. It's very broad, and it's more or less any kind of charge, unless it fits one of 7 exceptions. And one of the exceptions is that the charge is no more than their reasonable cost of providing electricity. Make sense? So SMUD, because it's a municipal utility district, it's a government thing. It's not like PG&E or San Diego Gas and Electric. They are subject to Prop 26, and I went through their records that they published as far as their rate design, the rate design study, and I found that they were basically inflated added up their cost, and then they added 9.2%, basically, which was gravy. I call it gravy. They didn't call it gravy. They called it a scalar, but I said that's why it's a tax, because it's 9.2% greater than your reasonable cost of providing electricity. Anyway, so I sued them. It's still alive in the Sacramento County Superior Court. And I'm not an attorney. I do not practice law, but I'm representing myself. And we'll see where that goes. But I have a strong case. All right. Thank you. All right, so I'm back to my story about I got rid of my smart utility meters, both gas and electric. Now, Eric had done some really great work before I got involved. He started this organization called Sacramento Smart Meter Awareness, and back in 2012 and probably 2011, he and a bunch of other folks that were also interested in the subject were going to the meetings, which were twice a month back then, of the SMUD Board of Directors, which they had recently put in smart electric meters. And so they were going to the meetings and saying, listen, you got to give us an alternative. Not everybody wants a smart meter on their house, and it's causing some people headaches and insomnia and so on. And so finally, after months and months of lobbying, the board of directors said, okay, we'll allow you to opt out if you have a single family house, and you can get a non-transmitting digital meter, which was a step in the right direction, but they charged them. The charge was going to be $39 a month, and that was too high. So Eric and his group kept on lobbying, kept on talking at the board of directors meetings, and finally a year later, this is March 2013, SMUD amended their smart meter opt-out policy, and they said, okay, we're cutting the monthly charge down from $39 to $14, and we'll allow you to have an analog electric meter. And that was a big deal. Eric said that they were the first municipal or publicly owned utility district or publicly owned electric utility in the United States to offer an analog meter opt-out. So I called SMUD and I said, I'm willing to pay whatever you guys are charging. Please get rid of this smart electric meter and give me an analog meter. And they did. And they did replace it within 2 days. I also called PG&E because I had gas through them. They had already had an opt-out policy with an analog meter, so I did that. And my point is, these are the things that I've done to lessen my own exposure to electromagnetic fields in my house. And just to finish this part, the smart utility meters, they record the data, let's say electricity usage or gas usage, but then they have, and it's broken down by, per day, per hour, per minute, how much electricity did you use, how much gas did you use, but then they have an antenna that transmits that data back to the utility. And we don't need to go too much farther than that. And it's not just the transmissions of data, but it's the handshakes, the electronic handshakes between the meter and the network of other meters, that sends it back to the utility. That's where the health effects come in. because those transmissions happen, in the case of SMUD, according to their website, on average 13,381 times per day. And SMUD says, well, yeah, but each little transmission of data or transmission with the handshakes only lasts for a fraction of a second. It's 1/100th of a second. And that may be true, but they add up and they take a toll on the body. All right, anyway, and I'm going to skip a few years. How about please remember your question, and we'll get to questions and answers later on, okay? But I do want to answer questions. Then, I have a friend named Paul that lives in Petaluma, and he had been active with the school district there, working to get the school district to remove the Wi-Fi from the classroom. He's married, and their daughter was in the public schools there, and like the rest of the students, she was being exposed in the classroom to electromagnetic fields from the Wi-Fi on the ceiling. And I don't know how many students are in the class, but suppose there are 30 students in the class, and every student will have some sort of a laptop computer, Chromebook, or iPad or pod or something like that. And it's not necessarily on all day, but the teacher has certain lessons or certain instruction that the teacher wants to deliver using the internet, so the kids all get out their Chromebooks and they're all on Wi-Fi, and up on the ceiling of the classroom there's a powerful Wi-Fi transmitter that's communicating with each of those 30 different laptops as well as the teacher's laptop. So there's just a lot of radiation going on, and there's a lot of research, I'm sure you've heard this from Julie, there's an awful lot of research that long-term exposure to this non-ionizing radiation is dangerous to your health. Some of the health effects, why don't I just ask you? Who has experienced a health effect from exposure, and what was it? What health effect have you experienced from exposure to electromagnetic radiation?
I get heart palpitations if I try to hold my cell phone for longer than 15 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Heart palpitations?
Insomnia.
Insomnia, right?
I get sweats, shaking, visual disturbance, sleep disturbance.
Sweats and shaking and visual disturbance and sleep disturbance. Lenka.
I think I experienced almost everything on the list besides dying.
Almost everything on the list besides dying.
I'm not kidding.
Uh-huh.
I may not look, but I live underneath about 15 feet away from a major 5G antenna, which distributes the latest technology, the MIMO microwaves in the neighborhood. It doesn't even supply the building. So I was 5 times in the emergency room for having a heart attack.
Wow.
I had a constant feeling that I cannot catch a breath, and I thought I'm going to just have a heart attack.
Wow.
I could sleep only 2 to 3 hours a night. I would have spontaneous muscle twitches lasting for 10 minutes. My vision is permanently gone because I now have to use my drops to replenish what natural tears would do for you. And it was that bad that after 5 months of having a wonderful place I was renting, I moved out, and I'm trying to recover, even though still until today I feel jittery. I feel like I'm high on a caffeine every day, and I'm trying to find a way how to not to be consumed by my physical feeling.
Wow. I'll try and recap some of that. Lenka said she's been into the emergency room 5 times where it felt like she was having a heart attack. At times she had difficulty breathing and felt jittery. And did you say legs? Did you say your legs were spontaneous muscle twitches that and damage to the eyes? And you got out of there, right? You got out of that
I got out
place.
of there, and I'm fighting, and I want to talk to the lady who was the first speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of.
Sherry, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. I feel for you. Well, it's real, and it happens. Imagine, though, that the children in the classroom, if they're in the classroom, I don't know how many hours a day the Wi-Fi is on, and it depends on the teacher and it depends on the school. But no matter how you slice it, to me it's a hazard. It's a health hazard, and it's not something that students ought to be exposed to. And the schools ought to be hip to this because the research it's all published and it's all out there. But we have sort of this myth in the United States that, well, if it's high tech, it's good, and we all want more high tech, right? More high tech is better than less high tech. That seems to be the prevailing thing. And as Julie mentioned, the government, whether it's state or local, cannot regulate the placement, construction, and modification of a personal wireless facility on the basis of the environmental effects of the radio frequency radiation, as long as the equipment complies with these regulations, which are EMF limits that were set by the Federal Communications Commission, which are antiquated and not helpful. And we'll talk more about that later. But anyway, I'm saying the system is set up to make it very easy for Cisco and all the manufacturers of routers and Wi-Fi to get their equipment into schools, and also to get cell antennas into neighborhoods. Anyway, Paul called me in February 2017 and he said, Mark, I'm going to Washington, D.C. I'm going to lobby the U.S. Senate to stop two bills, and this was S81 and S19. And both of these were basically 5G bills. And he said, I'm going in so and so many days. We're going to stay at the house of Kate in Baltimore. She has a wonderful house with no Wi-Fi. And why don't you go? And I said, okay. So I got on the plane and flew to Washington, and we did that. And there was also a woman named Susan from Florida that came up and joined us. And there was a guy named Kevin who he's from California, but he had been living in Washington, D.C. so that he could devote himself full time to doing this kind of advocacy. And we were there for about a week. Anyway, so that was kind of my first advocacy work, really, on the whole 5G issue. And they passed those bills, and I can't remember specifically. One of them was like the Data Act, but they work at it in steps. Here's one key fact I've heard from Joel Moskowitz, who's director of the Center for Family Health or something like that at UC Berkeley, and he says that the telecommunications industry, which I call telecom, spends $100 million per year lobbying Congress. $100 million per year lobbying Congress, and that is just an army of lobbyists. I mean, by now they've got them all convinced. And related to that, the previous, it's not a Democrat-Republic thing, because Tom Wheeler was the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, appointed by President Obama. And Tom Wheeler, in case you don't know that name, he's the ultimate telecom industry insider and lobbyist going back to the 90s. He's the last person that ever been in any position should have been in any position of authority at Federal Communications Commission, because he was there to do the work of telecom over the interests of the people, like public health. Then along comes Donald Trump, who's his chairman for the Federal Communications Commission, a guy by the name of Ajit Pai, P-A-I is his last name, and Ajit, A-J-I-T. And you can look up Ajit Pai on Federal Communications Commission's website, fcc.gov, and he was the Associate General Counsel for Verizon from 2002 to 2003. Again, this is a person that has absolutely no business being in any position of authority in FCC, which has huge regulatory authority that was delegated to it by the Telecommunications Act of 1996. And so you combine that with the $100 million that telecom spends lobbying every year, and you can see why our national policies on cell antennas and cell towers and routers and all that are what they are. Anyway, then fast forwarding a little bit, and I was in touch with my city, the city of Elk Grove, because I had seen what happened in Santa Rosa, where Verizon put up some very large and bulky and obnoxious looking cell antennas near people's homes. And then I got an email in probably February 2018 from somebody at the city, and they said, Mark, you probably want to see this. There's an AT&T subsidiary, which is called New Singular Wireless, PCS, had filed an application with the city for a code amendment, which was a zoning code amendment. And I said, yes, I'm interested. Well, every city has a municipal code, and every city has, as part of their municipal code, they have a zoning code. And it covers a lot of different things, like, this piece of land that we're on here is probably zoned for commercial. And the housing developments have got to be zoned for residential, and then there are industrial zones where they would put car washes and, I don't know, any kind of industry. So, but the zoning code also covers the where you can place a cell tower, cell antenna, and what the requirements are. And the application was by this AT&T subsidiary was basically to grease the skids, to create a process that was going to bypass the city council and make it very easy for them to get permits for cell antennas throughout the city of Elk Grove. Well, I got together with two people, friends of mine in Elk Grove, Sharon and Teresa, that have also, by that time, they had also sustained like this electromagnetic injury, as I have, and we said, let's do something about this. So we started our own little 3-person organization. It's not a corporation, it's just an informal organization, and we named it Keep Cell Antennas Away from Our Elk Grove Homes. And I bought that domain name and created a website there. It's probably the longest domain name, but it's something that they wouldn't forget. And we started, I should say something about people power. The title, what I was going to talk to you about was tonight, and have been, just haven't mentioned it, is people power, which is the answer to telecom hegemony. So we started our campaign of people power. And what I mean by people power is simply getting as many people as we could to learn the issue and be interested in the issue and to take some kind of action, whether that was going to the city council meeting and speaking up, or sending an email to the city council, or attending a meeting with one of the council members, or talking to their neighbors, any kind of individual involvement in it. And what I've learned, a number of things, but I've learned that there's strength in numbers. Because if one person, no matter how well informed and well educated he is or she is, if one person is trying to persuade the county or the city to either regarding a code amendment or a permit application, you're only going to get so far. And even if you're completely right, and I think that strength in numbers, I think that they perceive it differently when they see 10 residents talking about asking for the same thing for maybe different reasons, maybe similar reasons, or better yet, 20 or 50. By the time, anyway, so Teresa and Sharon and I began our People Power campaign in February 2018, printed up a petition. It was a short 1-page petition. One of the things I've learned is that when you're writing stuff for your campaign, you got to learn how to be brief. Or should I say, it's to your advantage to be brief. Also, when you're writing to your city council or your county board of supervisors, brevity is not my forte, and I've written I don't know how many emails to the city council that were way too long. And I did get feedback from the mayor, I'm friends with the mayor, our former mayor, and also from the city attorney. They both told me on separate occasions, Mark, your emails are too long, and you would get farther and you would have better results if your emails were shorter. So the mayor said, what you could do, Mark, is put a summary right at the beginning, bullet points if you like, and then put all the details and attachments and hyperlinks if you want to do all that. So, and I started to do that. And I don't know that I got a better response, but at least it made sense to me. And the city attorney told me the same thing. People power. So some of the things that I did were I attended probably every meeting of our city council from, let's say, late February 2018 through late August of 2019, when our city finally approved the code amendment. And then the council meets twice a month. Now, there were a few of those meetings that I missed because I was traveling. But I would go every time, and I would talk to them for 3 minutes, and it was all about cell antennas and permitting and health. And I would email them beforehand, specifically what I was going to talk to them about, so they would have some clue. And I always had a specific request. Now, just out of curiosity, how many people have gone and spoken to either your city council meeting or your county, your board of supervisors?
We have, in Topanga, we only have a town council, as I mentioned, we're unincorporated, and
Right.
it's only advisory. But there are people here not from Topanga, so.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, we have.
So did I see, rough, okay, good, a number of people. Again, then you know from experience, the time flies. When I have 3 minutes, all I know is the time flies, and I really got to be prepared, and it's to my advantage. And it doesn't mean I have it all done word for word or memorized. There have been times when I memorized my comments. There have also been times when I said, oh yeah, I want to say these things, But as I'm sitting there at the council meeting, I go, oh, there's one more thing I want to say. I'll put that in at the beginning. Well, that's a mistake, because inevitably what happens is that part takes too long, and then I don't get to the other things. But I always have a specific request, and so I kept on them. It's September 2018. There was one city council meeting, and after we did our public comments and Teresa and I left, I saw it in the video later, but the council held a discussion, and they said, well, they asked the city manager, have you consulted with any expert on this whole subject of cell antenna permitting and health that Mr. Graham's been talking about? No. And they said, well, why don't we host a big community workshop on cell antennas and permitting? And they committed to doing it that night, September 26, 2018. And the council directed the staff to hire somebody as an expert to make a presentation. And then this person was supposed to be neutral, unbiased, and an expert in the field. That sounds good to me, doesn't it? Neutral, unbiased, and an expert in the field. That's what the council told the staff to do. And they scheduled it for November 28th, 2018, which is 6 days after Thanksgiving. I didn't think it was a good choice of dates, but it was a date that was open. Well, who did they hire but a guy named William F. Hammett, professional engineer. How many people have heard the name Bill Hammett? Well, he does. He really makes the rounds in Northern California. Anyway, I got to check on this thing. Pardon me. I think it's still kicking. It's hard to tell. William Hammett, he is not neutral. He's not unbiased, and he's not an expert on the health effects. The city hired him, paid him $3,000 to make a presentation that, among other things, well, he was supposed to talk about the regulation of cell antenna, cell tower radiation, and the human health effects. And but they wouldn't tell me who they were considering hiring. I sent a couple of emails to our city manager and city attorney, and I said, well, who are you considering? And they said, we're not going to tell you. It's secret. It's privileged or confidential or something. But as soon as they signed the contract, they said, okay, Mr. Graham, here it is. And I said, Hammett, and I looked him up. He had done work, look at this, in 2018 for Verizon and for AT&T in San Francisco and in Sacramento, as well as, the other telecoms in other years. So he was the industry representative. Now, it's true that William Hammett also does presentations to cities, and he's still doing them. But to me, that doesn't take away the conflict of interest. When you disclose a conflict of interest, that doesn't mean you've eliminated it. He's still the telecom guy. So, and now AT&T spoke at that community workshop, and Verizon spoke at the community workshop, but they didn't have to do any of the misinformation because they had their man doing it. It was Hammett. He made two key misrepresentations. And again, part of the contract with the city was he's supposed to talk about the health effects, human health effects of radio frequency emissions. The first of which was he just failed to mention everything that has ever been published on the subject except for one document, and that is a standard from the IEEE, the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers, and the standard is called C95.1. Everything else that's ever been published, he didn't mention it. So that was a big misrepresentation, because there have been lots of studies that show that long-term exposure to this type of radiation, which is non-ionizing radiation, causes human health effects such as some of the things that we've heard about. A couple other things of the other health effects that it causes, there was something called the International EMF Scientist Appeal. This was May 2015, and it was signed by something like 239 scientists from 39 countries, and these were scientists that do research in this field. And basically what they said was this radiation based on our research is hazardous, and the regulations or the limits that are in place around the world are not protective. They're just way too high, and there need to be lower limits. Among those things that they mentioned, among the health effects, were learning and memory deficits, and they also mentioned structural and functional changes of the reproductive system. These are some of the things that telecom and our city or our county exposes us to when they either issue the permit or put up the tower. Bill Hammett did not mention the International EMF Scientists Appeal, which had been out for 3.5 years. Another thing he didn't mention was the study from the U.S. National Institutes of Health National Toxicology Program. I call it the NTP study, National Toxicology Program, and this was specifically about cell phone radiation and its effects on laboratory mice and rats. And that they had gone, it was a 10-year study. The government spent $25 million on it, and then they had a lengthy peer-reviewed process which ended in early November 2018, or about 2 weeks before about a month before Bill Hammett's presentation at our community workshop. And that study found clear evidence of cancer. Well, he didn't mention that. And the second,
And other harm, many types of harm.
I beg your pardon?
And many other types of harm.
Right, well, yes, many other types of harm. The second misrepresentation was about that standard. And I wasn't familiar with that standard at the time, but I looked it up afterwards. And then they gave me a time. The city was very nice because they allowed me to speak as like on behalf of the opposition to cell antennas. There was Bill Hammett, there was the city attorney, and he did his thing. Then there was Bill Hammett, the city's expert, and then AT&T got their chance to speak, and Verizon. But the city gave me 20 minutes, and so I had a prepared presentation. But I wasn't familiar with the standard, so I couldn't really respond with specific knowledge to what Hammett said. But I looked it up later, and what he said was the most recent version of this standard had been issued in 2005, but the IEEE was about to issue another revision. So this is C95.1-2019. But he's talking about it in November 2018. And what he said was they're not making any changes. And what I learned was it's on page 1 of the standard from the 2005 version. There's a section on scope and a section on purpose. The scope of this standard and the purpose of this standard is to prevent established adverse health effects. Established adverse health effects. And then they also had a section of definitions. Well, what is an established adverse health effect? They had a very narrow definition. I can't quote it specifically, but it basically listed like 4 types of health effects, which would include electric shock, or something that would make your heart stop, and anything else IEEE just deemed that it's not an established adverse health effect. And so you just see the logic here. If the scope and the purpose of this standard was to prevent established adverse health effects, and it's only that means that means that all these other health effects that we've talked about, that some of you have experienced, that I've experienced, that are in the research, IEEE just says no, it's not an established adverse health effect. Therefore, if a cell tower or a cell antenna is built that complies with our standard, and somebody living next to it has any of these other health effects that we've heard, well, our standard has succeeded in doing what it was intended to do, which is only to prevent the established adverse health effects. So it's not intended to prevent insomnia, tinnitus, heart palpitations, fatigue, all these other crazy things that we've heard, damage to your eyes, whatever, nervous system. And Bill Hammett didn't mention that. My intention, and I've said this to myself and a few friends for a long time, is I'm going to file a complaint with the state. There's a state bureau that issues licenses to engineers, and they have a code of professional conduct, and they're not supposed to use any misrepresentations. That's part of the code of professional conduct for engineers in California. So when I get around to it, and it's been a long time, I'm going to file a complaint with the state and say, here's the evidence. He misrepresented at this, and he misled our council and everybody in the audience. And the effect was that the council did not take the issue of health and health effects as seriously as I think they should have, because he misled them. So, yes.
10 minutes.
10. Okay, good. All right. So we continued our People Power campaign, and met with each of the council members, and those were useful meetings. But I want to mention one sort of a catch-22 that I ran into, and that is the council would say to us, a couple council members said to us, well, yeah, I can meet with you, but I'm not going to, I'm not going to take a position on any of this. And they were more or less in listening mode because they said, I'm not going to do that until it's on the agenda of a city council meeting. And I thought, interesting. That seems like a delay. And then what I found out how this works, by the time it was on the agenda for a city council meeting, which is August 28th of 2019, it was too late. The council members were not going to undo the year and a half of negotiating that the city manager and city attorney had already done with AT&T that filed the application for the code amendment. The council was also not going to undo the work of the planning commission, which had just approved the new code amendment 1 month prior. So the catch-22 is we won't look at it until it's on the agenda of the council, and by the time it's on the agenda of the council, it's too late. So it was really disappointing. But I have to say, I have to give my city credit for this. In our zoning code, they put something that I call the front yard rule. And every city should have this. It's perfectly permitted. I mean, the city has the regulatory authority, notwithstanding the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and in Section 704, the city has the authority to do this, and my city did. The front yard rule simply says that a cell antenna will not be, cannot be located immediately adjacent to or immediately across the street from the front yard of any residential dwelling. I'll say that again. A cell antenna cannot be located immediately adjacent to or immediately across the street from the front yard of any residential dwelling. Now, I have a house in Elk Grove. There's a front yard, and then there's a city-owned light pole, and then there's the sidewalk. So this front yard rule prevented the telecom from getting a permit to put a cell antenna on that light pole, which saved me. Because if they did, it would just drive me out of my house. I mean, I don't know what I would do, but I don't think it would be good. It wouldn't be good. I think that, and I haven't counted, I don't have a specific way of knowing, but I think that the front yard rule effectively protected maybe 90% of the homes in Elk Grove. And it's not just single family homes, it's apartments, because it doesn't specifically say a house, it says a residential dwelling. Now, the county here could do that. The city of Burbank, city of Los Angeles could do that if they were so enlightened and inspired. And one key problem, and then I'll touch briefly on SB 556. Senator Dodd introduced a bill earlier this year called SB 556, which I know that you've heard about, and they passed it through the legislature, but when you count the votes against it and those that were not voting, that was about 32%. So 60, let's call it 68% of the legislators in both the Assembly and the Senate voted in favor of this, despite of all our advocacy, and the others, 32% roughly, either voted no or didn't vote. And then Governor, on October 4th, it was 1 week ago today, Governor Newsome vetoed it, and that was a big deal and a big victory. So when we want to talk about good news, that is really good news, because that bill would have specifically authorized the placement of cell antennas on city streetlight poles. And also, it also said that it is the intent of the legislature that this bill will override all conflicting local laws. Well, the front yard rule in Elk Grove was a conflicting local law. So if the governor had signed that bill, then all the hard work we put in and the hard work that the council and the staff put into that code amendment back in 2019 would have just been wiped out. So there is hope. There are things that the cities can do. The city of Petaluma, ever since I think it was 2017, does not even allow cell antennas in residential neighborhoods. And you can look on my website, keepcellantennasaway.org. There's a section on Petaluma ordinance, and I quote it and show it to you and give you the citation. But it says, a cell antenna can be permitted in any commercial or industrial zone as long as it meets the following 7 conditions. But that's it, commercial or industrial. www.keepcellantennasaway.org. keepcellantennasaway.org. Another city that has done a good job or reasonably good job, is the city of Malibu. I have friends down in Malibu, and I was working with them last December, last September, and also this year in March. There was a council meeting on December 9th, and they were having a whole discussion. They have a good city council there, by the way. I'd like to, clone the Malibu City Council and bring them up to Elk Grove, because we would get a lot of things done.
Like them too.
You would, Lou? Okay, well, let's clone them twice. And they were having a whole discussion about how to achieve what they wanted to achieve. They really wanted to do the right thing for the residents. And I had mentioned the Elk Grove front yard rule in my public comments. They were probably surprised to hear somebody calling in to their city council meeting from Elk Grove. But during the discussion, one of the council members said, I want to come back to what Mark Graham said about, can we do something like that? And so they picked it up, and they did their wordsmithing right there during the council meeting, and they wrote it into their urgency ordinance that they passed that night. So they've done that for the residents, and I think that was a good thing. What else? Oh, other good news. Something I also want to mention. There's an attorney named Jim Turner and another named Julian Gesser, and they've started.
Julian has been here. He's spoken to a group.
Oh, great! You got to hear from Julian.
He actually was supposed to be here tonight, but he has health conditions.
Oh my goodness.
So originally we had planned to have him in October, yes.
Well, when he comes back, I want to hear him talk. Julian, I remember I was watched a conference call with him, and this goes back to the lawsuit that Children's Health Defense filed against Federal Communications Commission, which was very similar to a lawsuit that Environmental Health Trust filed against the Federal Communications Commission. And both of those lawsuits were about, they're trying to get the court to overturn the order from the FCC from December 4th, 2019. And that was an order that said, we are closing our reassessment of the scientific research on EMF health effects, and our conclusion is that there is not sufficient evidence to justify changing our maximum permissible exposure guidelines, or in other words, their EMF limits. Everything's fine. There's no new science that would change our mind. And of course, they were full of it, because there are hundreds of studies, probably thousands by then. So Children's Health Defense filed a lawsuit against FCC, and they said, you blew it off. I mean, there's something called the Administrative Procedures Act, and they really do have to consider the evidence that's presented to them. And the Children's Health Defense said, they just blew it off. And the Environmental Health Trust lawsuit basically said the same thing, and the court agreed with them. But here's how it played out. The Federal Communications Commission said, we are not a health and safety agency, which is true, and therefore we are going to defer to the Food and Drug Administration, which I think they're a health and safety agency, but they're also very heavily co-opted. Well, and this is what Julian Gesser pointed out. The FDA had issued some short little statement and sent it over to the FCC that says, oh no, there's no research, there isn't really any scientific research supporting health effects. And so FCC said, to the court, and when they issued their order in December 4th, 2019, they said, here it is, you see, we have it from the Food and Drug Administration. And the problem is, first of all, they're wrong, but the FDA has never gone through whatever formal process that they have for reaching that conclusion. I think it was some higher up at the agency. I don't know if it was the executive director of the agency, but I think he or she, felt politically inspired one day and typed out an email on the letterhead and sent it over to FCC, and that was that. The federal agencies are given a broad authority by Congress to make rules and regulations and that sort of thing, but they have to go through the process. And so what Julian said is the FDA didn't. So what he said is he's putting together, and I'm not an attorney, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but he's trying to force the issue. In other words, to force the Food and Drug Administration to actually go through whatever the formal process is to evaluate the published research on EMF health effects. So, and the intention is that they won't be able to just come up with the same conclusion that there's no evidence out there of harm. And the thinking is that if they have to go through the formal process, they won't. It'll just be much harder for them to just out and out lie about it. So good news. I don't know if that lawsuit's been filed yet, but he's either filed it or he's working on it, and I look at that as a good news thing. Okay. There are a couple of things I wanted to just briefly touch on. I remember hearing an expression. I used to live in Utah, and there was a chemical weapons incinerator in the desert just west of Salt Lake City in a town called Tooele. And I met some people that have, for years, they were trying to shut down the Chem de Mill, is what they called it. And I remember talking to one of them, I think his name was Craig, and he said, regulators don't regulate, they mediate. Regulators don't regulate, they mediate. I said, what are you talking about? And well, what he was talking about is the regulators are there and they've got the power to issue orders and permits and notices of violation and all that. There's the industry, which wants to do their thing and make their money. And there are the residents who would like to have a safe place to live and not be exposed to toxins and that sort of thing and be healthy. So the mediating involves the regulators they're kind of in the middle, and they're kind of mediating between these two opposing groups, the industry that wants money and the people that want health. So the point is, he was saying more people need to get involved, and this is part of my philosophy about people power. The more people that are involved and the more they are involved, that makes the regulators mediating turn out, in theory, more on the side of the people. Because if it's all industry, if the only people that they hear from are the industry, and maybe they get an email or two from the dedicated activist crusader saying, wait a minute, this is dangerous to our health. Just think of it as scales. This one's going to be a lot heavier and this one's a lot lighter. So if the regulators don't regulate, they mediate, they're going to come down on this side. I think that's a useful sort of thing to think about. And a couple other things. When we were doing our grassroots campaign, I did an ad on Facebook. And how many people have ever placed an ad on Facebook, like for anything? Okay. Have you ever done a political ad? Anybody ever done? You did? Ah, okay. Well, then you probably know. Especially after the 2016 election, it became a lot more difficult to do a political ad on Facebook. And I'll say two things about it. We reached a lot of people. We had an ad saying, this is what could happen to your front yard if the city of Elk Grove approves this zoning code amendment. So, and here are all the details. Here's what you need to do. Here's the email addresses of our city council members. Write to them today. And a number of people did. And those were important. Every voice mattered. But Facebook is frustrating. And I'll just summarize it all by saying they often reject the ad without telling you why. But they say, oh, well, your ad didn't comply with our advertising policies. And I write back and I say, okay, specifically, would you like to tell me why or how or what advertising policy didn't I comply with? They don't want to answer that, and I don't know why. But it's another useful tool. And going door to door with petitions and turning those into the city council, I think that was useful. I'll just wrap this up with as far as people power. On the staff report for the city council meeting, August 28th, 2019, which is when our city council voted to approve the code amendment that had the front yard rule, it said approximately 200 individuals have contacted the city to oppose the AT&T code amendment. And I think that plus, my constantly talking to them at every city council meeting and writing to them, but the combined effect of that was the people power that I think gave them. I think the city council also doesn't regulate, they mediate too, and I think that gave them the idea that there really was something there that they should pay attention to, and that is the health interest. And we were happy with that. I'm still happy, and I've thanked our council for the front yard rule. And the last thing was regarding health effects. When the city says you cannot permit you cannot place a cell antenna immediately adjacent to or immediately across the street from the front yard of a residential dwelling, is that health effects or is that aesthetics? And the reason that's an important question is the city cannot, by law, regulate the placement, construction, and modification of cell or personal wireless facilities on the basis of environmental effects, which, like Julie said, have been interpreted to include health effects. But the city can set reasonable aesthetic limits. And for me, I don't really care what you call it, as long as the telecom cannot get a permit to have a cell antenna on that city streetlight pole. That's what I wanted. and thank you very much. So whether they call it a regulation that's prohibited based on environmental effects, or no, this is the city's reasonable aesthetic standard, you see, it accomplishes the same thing. So that's one of the tricks that the city or the county will often throw at you to say, well, we can't do anything, our hands are tied, yakety yak. Their hands are not tied, and they need to learn what their powers really are. So that's my story.
Let's give it up to Mark and stay up there.
Yes. Thank you.
So 2 points that Mark made that I think are super important. One of them is the people power. I just want to remind people that if you live in Topanga, please work with me and work with us. We do need numbers to show up. It really does make a difference. And secondly, in addition to aesthetics, another thing that they've done in Malibu is, the issue of safety and fires. They've been able to show a correlation between the fires and utilities and things like that, and use that also in not only in terms of the city ordinance, the restrictive ordinances, the no front yard rules, but also they've been able to use this, to make a case similar to a case around environmental and health effects. So I do think that's really important. Thank you. There's so much more. I know there's so much more that you have to say. I just know that we love having time to network, to talk to Mark and other people here, so some of it becomes informal, and I think that's where the most work happens.
Okay.
So I want to leave a little time for that, but we do have time for a few questions. So does anyone have a question for Mark?
And you know what I
Over
want to do?
there, and then you.
Yeah, the phone.
What?
Just because I can start an audio recording here, and that the person that's asking the question can ask it into the
Okay.
this thing.
So why don't you just come on up and ask it into his recording?
Okay.
It's not,
And then Sylvia afterwards.
it's not
Excellent.
exactly a question. I just want
Okay.
to tell you that the way you talk, and I can really understand what you were saying. It just was really clear, concise. It was wonderful.
Well, thank
The
you.
way you talk, I can understand it.
Thank you very
Just
much.
wanna thank you. I think it's very important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I've been told that I speak board. I like to say that I speak board. I speak council. I speak committee. Yeah. All I'm saying is I know how to speak their language, and I think that's part of working within the system. They don't always agree with me, but I can at least speak their language. But thank you. I'm really grateful. Glad it came across that way.
I'm sorry, you indicated
Okay, you gotta talk really loud.
You indicated earlier that a friend of yours had been able to get the Wi-Fi out of the school, out of the classroom. Can you elaborate on how that was accomplished?
Okay. The question was, how was my friend able to get Wi-Fi out of the classroom? It's actually a mixture of two different stories. Paul in Petaluma tried to get their public schools to not use Wi-Fi in the classroom, and he was not able to do that. The school district is committed, and what they did was they took their daughter out of the public school and then homeschooling her. But the success that Paul had in Petaluma was that the city wrote into their zoning code that they will not permit a cell antenna in a residential zone. One short thing about the schools, there is something in the state education code, and it's in the school board policies of probably every school district in the state of California, and that is, and you don't even have to be a parent to do this, but any person that wants to can make a request to be given some time on the agenda of a regular school board meeting to talk about a subject that's, let's say, within the subject matter jurisdiction of the school board. Now, this is quite an unusual thing, and I did this back in 2016 in Elk Grove. I talked to our school board about Wi-Fi in the classroom. They were not even a little bit interested in my message, but they did give me like 17 minutes on the agenda, and I had a whole slide presentation, and Paul came and Eric came, and we had a good thing. So if you ever wanted to go talk to your school board about Wi-Fi in the classroom, and whether that's a health hazard for kids, and the fact that they can hardwire their classrooms, email me and I'll show you, but it's in the state education code. You have the right to do that, and your local school board policy gives you the right to.
Any other questions? Okay. Is there anybody else that has a question? Okay, and then
Yeah.
Armighty, and then Erica, and then we're gonna wrap up.
Okay, So does your body have to be between the meter and the nearest tower that receives its beam in order to have damage from it?
Okay, does your body have to be between the meter and the nearest tower in order to have damage from the radiation from the tower? I don't know exactly, but I'll tell you what I know. When we talk about 5G, the G stands for generation. And it just means, I don't know when the generation began or generation ended. It's kind of like Generation X or Generation Y, Generation Z. Somebody has drawn an arbitrary line. And the previous generation was 4G, the fourth generation. A couple things that are distinctive about the 5G antennas, which is that they use higher frequency, shorter wavelength, and they don't the signals don't travel as far compared to 4G. And that's why they want to put them up and down city streets. So I believe that the 4G antennas, they'll either go out like in all directions 360 degrees, or maybe they'll have a sector antenna that just 180 degrees, like if it's facing that side of the street. And whereas I believe that the 5G antennas, the 4G antenna finds your cell phone when you want to go online and sends your location to the nearest 5G antenna, and the 5G antenna creates a beam to your phone.
And I just want to add just one thing to that, which
Yes.
is the smart meters are pulsing constantly, thousands of pulses per second. Those pulses are wireless radiation. That's microwave pulse radiation.
Right.
That radiation is in your home, okay? Today in my home with my acoustimeter, I measured an increase from 0.04 to 0.60. The only difference that happened is that the smart meters are now connected to the 5G. So the meters are pulsing everywhere. So yes, you are being affected.
But if you're does your electric utility allow you to opt out and get an analog meter?
Well, they did, and then they stopped, and we also had the issue with them wanting us to have digital, quote, non-transmitting meters, which they can change like this from downtown, so you don't want one of those. But now they are, once again, allowing opt-outs. Now, the opt-out is going to be $50 a month.
A month?
And it's a lot harder to get if you're a tenant, but Edison, which is our local provider, is still currently allowing opt-outs.
Okay. That's it. That would be an investment in your health, but a big one. Yes?
Mark, I
Yes.
didn't hear you say anything about how being near a tower increases your blood sugar levels. And if you're borderline diabetic, it's going to kick you into diabetes. And if you're already diabetic, it'll make you need kidney dialysis. To be near one of these towers, I think that's one of the most persuasive arguments. Is that something you've ever heard? There's a Dr. Goldberg at Michigan did a whole talk on this and how it's going to increase our kidney dialysis off the charts by having 5G all over the place.
Okay. The question was about that one health of
We are in an unescapable group.
one.
There's a lot of health effects, there's a lot of doctors, and there's a lot of studies. I think the Environmental Health Trust, if you go to them and you go under the science, you'll get a lot of good information. 5G Free California also has a lot of good information on the science. There is a lot, and that is just one of many, many, many health effects. We don't have time to go into all of that tonight because our subject tonight is really about how do we stop this and like local, lessons learned. But feel free to talk to Mark afterwards. We'll wait to drive him back to my house. We do have two more questions. Almighty, and then, go ahead. You wanted to say
And I'll just follow up and say, I had not heard about that, but I don't doubt it. It messes with your entire body. I mean, it rattles your entire body. Our bodies run on little electrical charges. And think of what happens when you go in. If you go in and they suspect you've had some sort of a head injury, they'll put electrodes here and there all over your brain. And what are they measuring? The very, very, very small electrical impulses that are signals in your brain. And similarly, EKG they'll put the electrodes right all around your chest, around your heart, and they're measuring the electrical impulses. So along comes a smart utility meter, cell tower, cell phone, cell antenna, which is it's electrical energy. It is blasts of electrical energy, and you could see it rattles the entire body.
We got 2 more questions.
Okay.
And then we're going to move into our discussion.
Okay.
What does IEEE stand for, and why do you think Newsome vetoed SB 566?
Okay, what does IEEE stand for, and why do I think Governor Newsome vetoed SB 556? IEEE is the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers, and their website is IEEE.org. And if you want to find, I have a page on my website that's about the standard C95.1 and that misrepresentation that Bill Hammett did. And I'll be glad to, if you want to contact me, I can show you that specifically. But the other thing is, why should an organization of engineers essentially be making national health policy for the United States? I don't think they should. And if you look at the purpose of the IEEE, it's for the advancement of science. I don't hear anything in there about keeping us healthy. And the FCC says in their document about their current EMF limits that these are taken from IEEE, and here's the whole name of the document, but it's a C95.1. Oh, and why did Governor Newsome veto it? It's because of people power.
Yay.
People power. It works. It works. Okay. In particular, the individuals that wrote in, sometimes on behalf of themselves, sometimes on behalf of an organization like 5G Free California or Keep Cell Antennas Away. And it's also because of many cities and many counties that opposed this bill. And the cities, a lot of them, including my city, were following the lead of the League of California Cities. The League of California Cities did great work on this bill because they opposed it. This goes back to April. And they produced on their website, and they sent to every city their position letter and a sample, letter of opposition that they were giving to the cities that the city could modify and adapt and send in to oppose this bill. Now, I think the league should have opposed AB 537, which I didn't have time to talk about tonight, and SB 378, ditto. And there were a whole bunch of telecom bills this year, and the league didn't oppose any of those, and those all got signed, as far as I know, by the governor. The background of that is 2017, the telecom put all their eggs in one basket. And you were involved in this at the time, right? Of course. It was called SB 649. It was the ultimate telecom power grab. They were going to strip away power from the cities and counties to regulate the placement of cell antennas, and they were going to hand it over to telecom. And there was a lot of opposition from the league, 47 counties, 325 cities, lots of individuals, and October 15, 2017, Governor Edmund Brown vetoed SB 649, which is a very good thing. So this time around, telecom said, okay, we're going to spread them out. We're going to have 10 bills instead of 1, and we'll see how many they can stop. So we stopped the worst one. But that's why Governor, and you can find his veto message. If you go on the legislature's website, you can look up every bill. So look up SB 556, and it shows the status, and you can actually find the governor's veto message. And I can't quote it exactly, but he basically said, well, in 2017, Governor Brown said this bill does not strike the appropriate balance between, the telecom and the local government or localities. And I think Governor Newsome's message was about the same.
And we reminded him of 649, so we gave him all the talking points. So Armighty, you got the last question. Oh, Erica, you got the last question. Armighty just asked her.
Yes.
My apologies.
I was listening to you talk about smart meters and opt-outs for electrical and gas.
Yes.
And now I'm wondering about water because I tried to opt out for the water. I opt out for electric and I don't have to worry about the gas. But water, my old analog meter broke and it was dysfunctional, they said. And they said there was no alternative.
They're not offering
AWP.
opt-outs here for water.
Really?
Water meters.
Okay, but then now those are two different things. One is there's no alternative, like, in other words, they're saying that there was not an available analog water meter?
Yeah, they're not making them, but they're not available to install.
Okay, and see, that's very different from we don't allow it. So I don't know if they're made. If they're made, I would say you could search. There are still, they're probably not making analog electric meters anymore, but there are some out there that are in good condition. I mean, SMUD took away 600,000 of them that were all in working condition, and I asked during a board meeting, what did you do with them? What did you do with them? Every one of these things was working, and you know it. And they said, well, we recycled them.
Well, you know, Edison said they didn't have any analog meters yet, but they somehow found them. Okay. Same thing with Charter Spectrum. They say they didn't have any more. What are they, modems or whatever they are, without that you could turn the Wi-Fi off on them.
Uh-huh.
Well, they found them. You know, when you pressure them enough, or you threaten a lawsuit or whatever, they find them. So what I would say on this, because I do think we should challenge on the water meters on opt-out. What I would just say is, if you are interested in, and I mean interested in working with me, and that means actually having meetings together. That means actually people who will step up on this and want to do something on the water meters. Please email me, 5G3California@gmail, or if you have the Julie Magic, just email me, because if I have at least 5 people who want to work on this, I'm willing to take it on. It's worth taking on. So thank you, Erica. All right,
That's
so
a good offer.
we are going to move into networking mode. We did lose a few people, but I do
Thank you,
agree
everybody.
he's a very clear presenter. I knew he'd really work well for this group, and really delighted to have you with us, Mark. And I know people have a lot of questions to you, so let's take it to the snack area and enjoy the beauty of the surroundings.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. It's awesome.